Ontario budgets are usually pretty sober affairs. Not the case for last April's offering, as there was a surprising amount of alcohol-related policy in it. 9 a.m. first call, tippling in the park, tailgating even. The Conservatives are liberalizing booze. What will it all mean for the province? Let's find out. From Pegeen Walsh, Executive Director of the Ontario Public Health Association, Matt Gibson, President of Royal Canadian Mead, Ren Navarro, owner and operator of the consulting company Beer Diversity, Jordan St. John, co-host of the Ontario Craft Beer Guide, the podcast, and Heather Bone, research fellow at the Consumer Choice Centre and a PhD student in economics at the University of Toronto. And we're delighted to welcome everybody for a timely discussion here on the agenda to TVO tonight. Let's just start, shall we, Sheldon, by bringing up the graphic, and we'll talk about some of the proposed changes to the alcohol laws here in the province of Ontario, starting with, yes, tailgating at sporting events. That is coming to a venue near you. Municipalities can designate public areas, such as parks, for drinking alcohol, allowing bars, restaurants, golf courses to serve alcohol as of 9 a.m., changing maximum serving sizes at breweries, cideries, wineries, and distilleries, allowing establishments to advertise promotions such as happy hour, and granting casinos the ability to serve complimentary alcohol. Add to that the rather significant expansion of alcohol retail outlets, and you've got a fairly comprehensive, very new package of liberalizing alcohol in the province of Ontario. Let's go around the table, and I want to get a sense from everybody here what we think. Please.
I think in some cases this just normalizes existing behavior. Some of these things kind of codify things that are already happening in the market, and in some cases there are some glaring problems.
We shall get into those. Heather.
I think that mostly we're just catching up with the rest of the world in terms of our alcohol laws. What we've seen is that a lot of our pre-existing laws have an almost 100-year history coming out of Prohibition, basically designed to restrict consumer access to alcohol. And I think that it's a win for consumer choice that we're re-examining some of those regulations.
Pegeen.
We don't have an availability problem. We have a huge issue with harms and risks. There's more people that are dying of alcohol than opioids, and more people are being admitted to hospital for alcohol versus heart attacks. So we need to talk about how can we balance this with a provincial strategy that can mitigate those harms and risks.
And we shall. Matt.
So while I have a lot of issues with a lot of other things that the Conservative government are doing, I think I'm pretty excited about a number of these changes. And as Jordan had already said, a lot of this was behavior that people are already engaging in, and now we're just basically allowing it and bringing it out into the open, which I think is going to be advantageous.
And what is Royal Canadian Mead, incidentally, while you have the floor?
Sure. So Royal Canadian Mead is Canada's first pure session mead. So we are taking the world's oldest alcoholic beverage, which is fermented honey, mead, and we're making it modern by serving it more as a beer or cider style. So 5 to 6% carbonated, served in a can rather than in a wine bottle. And we're releasing our first batch into the LCBO in about 2 weeks.
Gotcha. Okay, finish it off here, please, Ren.
I'm cautiously optimistic, though I wonder how it'll affect minorities, people who have differently abled, people of color, LGBTQ groups. I kind of wonder if they're actually part of that big picture.
How would they not be?
I feel like some of this is targeted at really specific groups, right? We're looking at socioeconomic behaviors and kind of saying like a general piece of society is able to purchase alcohol already, and they don't have to worry about these things. And yes, the behaviors are already there, but we're not talking about other groups of people who may be affected by it.
Follow up again. I'm not sure I follow you here.
So,
like, who can't purchase booze today that wants to?
Well, I mean, let's talk about the Indigenous peoples. So there's already a stigma around that. When we look at advertising and who we're talking to, we're usually talking to white communities, and we're talking to males, and we're not talking to, again, people of color, differently abled. Those people aren't part of that conversation.
Thus, Beer Diversity.
Thus, Beer Diversity.
Which is the name of your outfit. Let's follow up on consumer choice. Sure. Is availability of supply really a problem in the province of Ontario today?
I think so, based on the fact that polling has indicated that the majority of Ontarians do want to see a challenge to the near monopoly of the LCBO and the beer store.
It's true, we're not like Quebec.
Right.
You can't go buy beer or wine or spirits at your local dépanneur as you can in Quebec. Some people think that's actually an advantage in Ontario. You don't think so?
I don't think so, and I think it actually hurts poor people more than we realize. If you think about it, if you have a high income, you can go to the LCBO or the beer store and buy a large quantity of alcohol at one time, and you don't have to go and wait in lines very often. But if you're of a lower socioeconomic status, the inconvenience caused by the LCBO and the beer store hurt you more because you have to make more frequent trips.
The province of Ontario, finance minister in particular, Vic Fedeli, often makes the point that there are thousands upon thousands and thousands more availability opportunities in Quebec than there are in Ontario, and he's trying to do something about that. What's your view?
Well, I feel there's this myth that, oh, we should be like other jurisdictions, Quebec, Alberta, where they've privatized, they've made it easy access. But in fact, when you look at the data in terms of health harms, it's very troubling because they do have very high rates of consumption. They have high rates of hospitalization. So great, you're getting access. But on the other hand, what's not apparent often to our communities is what that means in terms of the health harms. So for most people, they don't have an issue with alcohol, but if we have over 20% of Ontarians that have problematic use of alcohol, then we need to talk about that and we need to address that. And we know from research that the more you make alcohol available, the more people consume it, the more they consume, then the more harms.
Jordan, do we have an availability problem in Ontario?
Well, I'm going to take an unpopular tack with my craft beer audience and suggest that we probably don't have an availability problem. I think that 2 hours worth of planning has never really caused me any problems in acquiring beer. Thinking ahead a little bit does wonders. What we might have is a retail opportunity problem. We have something like 360 brewing entities in the province, and not a lot of them have shelf space. So access to market for the companies involved is a real problem. Access to alcohol for the public is probably not.
Matt, is it really the case that if you offer people many, many, many more locations from which to purchase alcohol, alcohol sales will go up?
So I don't have any hard stats on that, but sort of take on Jordan's point of the, we have so many breweries and cideries and now one meadery in Ontario, and that's just going to continue to grow. But I don't think that putting beer in convenience stores is actually going to give the majority of those producers any more access to market, because what we're seeing is it's a logistics issue. I, as a small producer, can only have so many drivers or hire so many third-party companies, can only afford to have so many salespeople in the road or on the road. If I have 1,000 new customers or 1,000 new potential customers through convenience stores, I can't keep up with that. The big guys can keep up with that, the Molsons, the Anheuser-Busch InBev. So all you're going to do is open up more shelf space for Budweiser and Coors Light. And the small guys, unless you have a convenience store owner who decides, I'm going to open a boutique, or I'm going to focus on these really rare availability bottles and cans and products, which could happen. There's some great dépanneurs in Montreal that are very focused on bringing in the really good stuff. But the vast majority of the stuff you find in a dépanneur is Boreal or mass market lagers. So I don't know that having convenience stores is going to help someone like our company or a small brewery or a small cidery really get any more access to the market.
Heather, let me follow up with you on that. If you offer alcohol for sale at many thousands more locations in the future than you do today, does that necessarily mean you will sell more alcohol?
The evidence on this is pretty mixed. I've seen things suggesting that that's the case. I've seen things suggesting the opposite. There is a study that looked at Virginia and West Virginia, and Iowa's experience, and they actually found that there was a reduction in per capita alcohol consumption, and that was because people bought less booze when they were making more frequent trips, which encouraged them not to drink as much at home. So, of course, these questions are difficult to answer from an economics perspective, just because culture and a lot of other confounding variables really do impact people's alcohol consumption. So, for instance, we see in Europe, where alcohol is a lot more available, way more accessible, for instance, in Italy, and their rate of problem drinking is 6.2%, and in Canada, it's 23% of people have had a heavy drinking episode in the last 30 days, and it's alcohol is way more accessible in Italy than it is in Canada.
That's a cultural thing, though.
Yeah,
They're
it's a
sort of
very cultural
taught
thing.
from a young age to demystify
Exactly.
the whole thing.
And
Can you help us
if
out
I
on this
may
at all?
weigh in on that, in fact, I was looking this morning at some statistics around France, and they've just launched a national campaign because they're very concerned about the impact of alcohol use in France, and they're trying to curtail it. So there's something like the 6th leading country in alcohol use and problematic use. So there's a lot of myths out there about, oh, making it more available is going to be fine. In fact, we're seeing in various jurisdictions in Canada and in Ontario that this is a problem. And if you look at data coming from the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, they've even looked in the last 2 years since we've seen this increase in distribution with increase in hospital admissions. So at a time when we're trying to save healthcare costs and reduce that hallway healthcare, this is not going to be helpful. And I wonder, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? When the government first started this, they spoke to us about BC, how 70% of wine and 70% of British Columbians drink BC wine. In Ontario, it's something like 30%. So if our issue is that we really want to grow our local industry, we want to have access to local products, those grapes, those apples, and we want to have those tax dollars stay in Ontario, and we want to have employment in Ontario, then let's tackle the issue of awareness about the high quality of Ontario products. Let's not look at how we can increase consumption. Let's shift that consumption is for Ontario products. So I would argue that we're not really tackling the root causes here. What is the problem that we're trying to address? We're sort of blanket a whole series of measures that we think taken together are going to create a lot of harms for us, our communities.
Let's add some data to this. Abacus Data is a polling company, and they were out in the field not too long ago. Sheldon, you want to bring this graphic up? Moving beyond the LCBO and the beer store, apparently 2 in 3 Ontarians support the idea that private retailers can sell alcohol. 6 in 10 support adding spirits to grocery store shelves. And slightly more than half of Ontarians support expanding alcohol sales into convenience stores. Okay, Ren, you start us off on this. Are we ready for these? Are we ready for a much more liberalized alcohol sales system in Ontario?
I don't think so. I mean, that's kind of the simple answer to it. But it's on the surface, I think it's a great idea because access is a great thing. But as Jordan said, if you plan your day properly, you can get to a lot of alcohol, not just beer. You know, distilleries are popping up all over the place. But what we're not talking about is what's the effect and the impact to the person who owns the convenience store.
What do you think it will be?
I think if it's a family owned, I mean, I'm surrounded by several family run convenience stores and they have their kids working there. So their kids can't handle alcohol, which means that little Timmy's no longer working there.
Yeah.
And this convenience store owner now has to think about bringing someone else in. So there's an additional payment for them that they have to worry about that they didn't worry about before. If they don't carry alcohol and the guy down the street does, they may lose that business.
If there's a 16-year-old working the register at a convenience store, should they simply pass an amendment to the law saying they should be allowed to check out the wine or beer bottles that are being processed?
I think that's probably a whole new bucket of problems. Because then, you know, now you've got to pay someone to create that department that even handles that piece.
This is, if I may, one of the difficulties that we've had with all of these policies.
Yep.
It's the fact that they're not particularly subtle. There is not a lot of thought about knock-on effects. I see people suggesting that maybe the provincial government is using this as a distraction. That suggests that there might be some element of stealth involved. I do not believe that is the case. It's just not very subtle.
Well, yeah, why don't we slow down and have conversations and have some consultations and think through how can we balance these different interests? Because of course we want to have availability of alcohol, but on the other hand, what are the kinds of measures that will help us reduce those risks? So for example, on the Ontario Public Health Association and other health organizations are calling for a provincial alcohol strategy. And so that gives us this opportunity to look at this in a more comprehensive way and figure out how we achieve that balance. And I was just thinking
what does
about—
that mean even? What's a provincial alcohol strategy?
Well, in an alcohol strategy, would look at raising awareness. Like most people have never heard of low-risk drinking guidelines. Does anyone here know what they are? Have you heard about that? Yeah, you've probably
Low-risk
heard of the food guide.
I
So
see.
we know what a food guide is. It gives us advice and support around how can we eat healthily. So with low-risk drinking guidelines, these are guidelines that have been developed by the Canadian Centre for Substance Abuse. They've been endorsed by all federal, provincial, and territorial health ministers. And what they do is they lay out how can we reduce our risk from alcohol. So for example, as a woman, I should think about not drinking more than 2 drinks a day, and in a week, no more than 10. And for men, that would be 3 drinks a day and no more than 15. If you're pregnant or considering getting pregnant, no alcohol is a safe amount. If you're a young person, again, to be very careful and wait until you're at that appropriate age. And how do you drink safely? Not drinking and driving, having water in between your drinks, having food.
Okay, well, you've just in 20 seconds laid out what a strategy would look like. This doesn't sound that complicated to do.
Well, exactly. There's different components. We should also be monitoring and keeping track and pulling together that data so we can better understand, well, what is the impact as we change our policy approach?
Do you think we're capable of a much more consumer choice-oriented system?
I think so. I think, to be honest, I think it's being done in most of the world, and Ontario is more of the exception, not really the rule in terms of policy. So I think what the Ford government's doing right now is mostly just modernizing our alcohol strategy. What I do agree with is that I do think there needs to be more of an emphasis on education. I didn't know, for example, what the definition of heavy drinking was until this morning, until I looked it up. And I think that in terms of alcohol consumption, we see that cultural factors are really, really huge in terms of dictating how much people drink. And I think that needs to be a larger part of the conversation.
Jordan, what does a healthy drinking culture look like to you?
Well, for me personally, I take about 4 days off a week.
Well,
I'm not.
he's so deadpan. I didn't know if he wasn't sure if he meant that or not.
From everything.
Well, for me, a healthy drinking culture is probably one of moderation. There is something that I tell the kids in my class at George Brown: beer is meant to be drunk. You are probably not.
Beer is meant to be drunk. You are probably not meant to be drunk.
I think education is a significant component here because you want people to understand what they're ingesting, and you also want them to understand the physical ramifications of doing that. And I mean, beyond a certain point, people are responsible for their own behavior, but giving them good information is always a really good choice.
Well, Matt, I think I know how Peggy would answer this question, but I want to know how you would answer the question. If we make the availability of alcohol much more significant, as it looks like we're about to do, is there going to be more public drunkenness and problems with alcohol in this province?
Anecdotally, I don't believe so. I know that last year, so the Beer Canada just released their report, and beer sales, and this is not all alcohol sales, but beer sales in Canada were down nationally about 0.3%. So not significant, but they're not up. As well, Ontario has the lowest consumption per capita of beer, and that's after beer was put into grocery stores. So we suddenly had another 150, 200 outlets available for beer sales, and no one was going out and buying that much more beer, if any more. And so I think you can extrapolate that out to the idea of drinking in parks. People are already doing that. That's just behavior.
We're doing it illegally, though.
Exactly, but we've legalized marijuana, and we're allowed to smoke marijuana in parks. My understanding of the purpose of consuming marijuana is to get intoxicated. So it would be very hypocritical to say you can smoke a joint in Trinity Bellwoods, but you can't enjoy a beer from the local breweries. And at the same time, by allowing that, we can redirect the resources that we're wasting by enforcing silly drinking tickets to areas that need more of those resources.
Peggy, what about that? It doesn't sound like you can draw a straight line between availability and increased public drunkenness and problems.
Well, it's interesting that you would go to a very visible sign of problematic use. And I think the challenge is that there's so many things that are invisible to most of us, because for most of us, we don't have an issue with that. But if you go back to the corner store, look at all the theft that we've seen in LCBO. So now the police associations are very worried about corner stores, and they are concerned that there'll be theft for sales on the black market. It's not about one person trying to get access to that. Meanwhile, back to the health issues, many women I talk to have no awareness about the link between breast cancer and alcohol. So again, why you would want to moderate and understand the risk is because of all the health consequences. So we've heard of liver disease, but we don't think enough about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder or injury or mental health disorders. So I think our biggest challenge about alcohol is that we don't really want to talk about the problem that we have. On the one hand, most of us can drink responsibly, but we're seeing 20% that have problematic use. So and we're seeing increase of women, especially binge drinking. So on the one hand, we're saying, oh, what's the big deal? Yet if we look at those, not only the health harms, there's social impact, it impacts the criminal system, the legal system, and also workplaces, and that affects our productivity and our economic impact.
Ren, can I ask you about that? I mean, particularly with young people nowadays, the new, well, it's probably not that new, I'm just finding out about it newly. The craze is not to go to parties and get drunk. The craze is to actually start drinking before you go to the party and then continue drinking if you're a teenager at the party. How worried are you that whatever these new changes entail will encourage more of that?
The good old-fashioned pre-drink.
The pre-drink.
I know. I mean, that's always. I remember the pre-drink from when I was younger. But I don't think that that's a thing that's going to change. I think when you start saying you can drink in public spaces, that's going to blur the line of where that public space is. We're talking about drinking in a park, but again, that's one of those things that everyone's going to do. Like you're saying, already happens at Trinity Bellwoods. Second, the weather's nice. There's beer cans everywhere. So I think that it's education and it's talking to kids of certain, backgrounds that we're not talking to. So again, if there is the equivalent of the food guide about alcohol, we need to be taking this out to groups of kids of certain backgrounds that we're not usually talking to, right? So let's not talk to necessarily the hipster kids who are at Trinity Bellwoods who already get it. Let's catch them a little younger in those kids who are pre-drinking in their basements, and at their parents' places.
Jordan, do you know, as you look around the world or look around North America, do you know of another jurisdiction that you think hits the balance properly between caution and availability?
Well, not really. I mean, the Ontario system is so sort of obscure. So many other jurisdictions have either total availability, where it's just available in convenience stores and everywhere. There are examples in the United States where they have state-controlled liquor stores. Pennsylvania comes to mind. I believe that there is a package store kind of situation where you're allowed to buy beer in six-packs, but not in singles. These kind of fall under the headings of those newspaper columns you see periodically about outdated laws in various places, like it is illegal to walk a pig down the sidewalk in Butte, Montana. I think that some modernization is probably needed, but I'm not entirely sure that we can look to other markets to find that balance. I think it's something that we very much have to navigate ourselves and should have the ability to do so.
Let's read this from the Globe and Mail here. This is just from a few weeks ago. Ontarians' relationship with alcohol is already spinning out of control. The most recent available data from 2014 estimates that alcohol was directly responsible for 5,147 deaths in Ontario, or just over 5% of all deaths that year. In the same year, there were 32,897 hospitalizations due to alcohol across Ontario. Sounds to me like it's, based on these numbers, it's a reasonable question to ask whether or not we can handle our alcohol consumption. Clearly, some of us can't. What do we think?
I mean, I think that it's kind of a paternalistic attitude to take to suggest that we can't handle our own alcohol consumption.
Well, some people clearly can't.
I suppose, but subjecting everyone to a system that dates back to Prohibition is not necessarily the way to deal with this. The way to deal with it is to make individuals aware of what problem drinking looks like, the effects that would have in their own life, and make education a part of the strategy and empower individuals to make those decisions for themselves.
Matt, how do we get these numbers down?
Well, I think to that exact point. So it's not about placing restrictions on who can access alcohol, or which responsible adults can access alcohol. It's about putting resources into education, into healthcare, things that unfortunately the Ford government seems to be hell-bent on cutting, and encouraging responsible consumption. And that falls on the producers as well. It's our responsibility to ensure that we're putting a message out there that yes, enjoy our products, but enjoy them responsibly. Don't go pre-gaming and chugging too much of this. Enjoy one or two in a park or at a picnic or over dinner, and enjoy the product for what it is and not for the undesirable effects it may have on you.
Pegeen, do you think alcohol manufacturers are doing a good enough job at getting that message out?
I think this is an issue that everyone has to pull together on, as you say, in the industry, what role they can play to raise awareness. For example, the LCBO, they're challenging those that are underage. So as that shifts to corner stores, how is that going to work? The restaurateurs are trained in safe serve to make sure those that they are serving, they know when to cut them off. So I think it's a societal issue and it needs all of us pulling together. But government does have a role to play, and we do have a lot of international, national, and provincial data about what kind of policy levers can make a difference. So it's not necessarily this one change or that change. It's more the combination of all of them and the speed at which it's happening. So as I say, I think if we can bring these different interests together and talk through how do we work together to tackle the negative effects and reduce those harms, because it's affecting not only our healthcare costs, our economy, and other parts of society.
Do you have a view, Jordan, as to what government's role ought to be here in terms of minding our P's and Q's when it comes to alcohol?
Does the government have business in the tap rooms of the nation? Yes, I think they do. There's certainly the sense that you should have regulation responsibly, and it should be determined probably based on pre-existing conditions. Like if you've got the system of laws that we have currently, we're tweaking them with a couple of these things. For instance, the 9 a.m. opening rule, people are able to get special exemptions for that for the World Cup. That's already happening. The happy hour thing, that is something that bars are already doing. So it makes sense to sort of liberalize that a touch. But that's exactly the kind of thing that you want. You want that minutia. You want that ability to make substantive changes in a very incremental way. I don't think you can just say, tear the system down. Convenience stores, 9,000 of them, tomorrow. It's not really good policy. Good policy requires data and actual forethought.
One thing, if I may, that we haven't talked about is the role of municipalities, because they do have a role now in terms of where bars and other outlets are going to be located. There's different kinds of bylaws that they can pass. So I think it's really important that these kinds of changes empower municipalities because they play that role in balancing the different interests in the community.
Well, and this is one of the things that comes up in Schedule 38 of that proposed bill, which is the public places is the actual language. It's not parks, and it's not just for tailgating. It is downloaded onto the municipalities to determine exactly what public place will be available for the service of alcohol. And that is a very wide palette to paint from. You could theoretically make all of Perry Sound licensed. You could license a sidewalk out front of a pub. You could do anything with the public space. But it really depends on the responsibility of the municipal government. It's kind of an interesting situation.
As you do the math, do you believe that the costs, and we just saw some of them here as it relates to deaths and hospitalizations, do you think the costs associated with alcohol are made up for by the increased availability and the easier time people will have going forward getting alcohol that they want, and most of whom will drink responsibly and safely with?
I think so, yes, but again, it's very difficult from just an economics perspective to parse out what's cultural and what's not. I've done some research in this kind of fields before related to impaired driving, for instance, and found that while Alberta's impaired driving rate did go up as they privatized their sales, it went up less than it would have, using some counterfactual analysis. It went up less than it would have had they kept with their state liquor stores. So really, it's really difficult to do this kind of analysis, but unless there's strong evidence suggesting that that will be launched into turmoil tomorrow, I'm tempted to support policies that enhance consumer choice.
Okay, Pegina, I want to go to you on that because presumably, if there are, I think this is an if there are economic advantages to increasing the availability of supply and opportunity, are they, do you suspect, going to be outweighed by the costs to public health?
Well, again, there's so many myths about this issue. Right now, we know that something like $5 billion is spent on the costs and harms related to alcohol. And yet, the revenue coming in is in the $3 billion mark. So we're spending more on the harms than we are in the revenue that's generated from sales. So we've got a gap. And I think the biggest issue with alcohol is just the way we even talk about it. So most of us have probably been affected by someone who has problematic use. They say something like, for every person who has problematic use, there's three others that are affected. And we don't really like to talk about it. And so this whole issue of harms, it's really invisible. So we're thinking, what's the big deal? These are changes, they're happening anyway. But we rarely take the time to really look at this data and talk about, well, who is being affected? How are they being affected? What are the different sectors? What are the that are being affected? And what are the costs? So I'm pleased that you're bringing this to public attention because I feel it's a topic that's just, it's so embedded in our culture. Like, oh, I'm having problems, I'll have a drink. I'm tired, I'll have a drink. You know, we see alcohol as the solution to so many issues. And so it's just commonplace and, oh, it's a rite of passage. And so I'm not saying, of course, you know, we want to enjoy, especially Ontario products, but let's be more knowledgeable and aware and have policies that can help reduce that problematic use.
Matt, if we think, though, about alcohol on a continuum, And if we assume that sort of at one end of the continuum is prohibition, and at the other end is, let's say, 1860s, 1870s Ontario, where anything goes. There was a tavern at every corner and public displays of drunkenness all the time. Where are we now, and how far should we be going in any particular direction?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely not the 1860s model. I think the vast majority of alcohol consumers are using alcohol to complement their everyday activities. So they're enjoying a nice meal, they're playing a softball tournament, they're watching the Jays game. And I think that's where we want alcohol to be positioned, that it should be a complement to your life in the same way that snacks are, in the same way that anything can be. But we can't deny the fact that people are going to have problematic use, as they do with anything. But again, I don't think that prohibition is the answer to these problems. We showed that with marijuana use. People were consuming marijuana regardless. If you legalize it, then you can control it a bit better, and you can dedicate those resources to the medical needs, the education needs. So I do think a lot of these liberalizations of use are great, but we do need to be cautious and not just open the floodgates and let anybody sell moonshine hooch out of their bathtub out their front door.
Ren, how about you on that? How will we know when we have liberalized enough?
Oh man, I think we're gonna do the slippery slope for a bit, and then we'll slowly claw our way back up, because we've all said education is such a key thing, but there's such huge groups of people that they're not even affected by alcohol because religious backgrounds or they've had issues in the past, and so they're left out of this. So how do they benefit? Well, they probably don't, and so us being like, well, I hope we can drink in the corner store. It's, well, who do we leave out? And I think that, we definitely need to update these laws, because prohibition was a really long time ago and things need to get updated. But we need to do it in a really smart way, and I don't think we're there yet.
Jordan, this may be the sort of most significant liberalization in, many, many decades. How will we know when we have liberalized enough?
Well, possibly when the craft brewers stop complaining about shelf space. That will be on the 3rd of never. Yes.
That'll be on the 3rd of never, you say?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know exactly how you know that you have hit the exact balance. I know that prohibition doesn't work. Letting everybody just try everything all at once will probably not work either. I think that what you have to do is calmly and rationally move forward from the space that you're in now, have a stated objective that you're trying to reach, like balance, and then probably move towards it through legislation. Some governments are more capable of that than others.
The drinking age in the province of Ontario right now is 19. Does it belong there? What's your view, Begin?
That's good.
You're okay with that?
Yes.
Anybody here think that drinking age needs to either get higher or lower?
Oh, let's go higher.
I actually
Yes.
do think that it should be 18. And the reason for that is mainly from a harm reduction perspective. If you consider that people are going to universities when they're 17 or 18 years old, they're going to university at that age, and it is way safer for people to consume alcohol in bars. They will put at a way lower risk of sexual assault if they're consuming alcohol in bars and bartenders are serving them than if they're going to house parties. So for that reason, I do believe that the drinking age should be 18, just to help reduce the rates of sexual assault related to alcohol use.
If I could just weigh back in on this age issue. So, I jumped at the higher age because there's also issues around the cannabis as well.
Sure.
And so this makes it challenging if you have different ages for different things. But the part that we're not talking about is understanding the brain development of young people and what the impact is. So I agree there are issues you want to keep in mind around harm reduction, but at the same time, what's the signals that we're sending to young people that they understand what does that mean in terms of mental health and what have you.
But here's the thing. If you want the drinking age of 21, that you're basically saying to 90% of Ontario, you're not allowed to have an alcoholic beverage legally while you're a college or university student. And that's just not enforceable.
Well, that's why when you said 19, I said, let's go with 19, because a number of health groups have been advocating for 21, and it is very tough because of existing cultural context. But there are some states in the US that are looking at, can we raise sale of tobacco, cannabis, can we raise it to that age because of the health impact for that developing brain under 25 even. But obviously you have to find a solution that's going to be workable within your community.
Ren, if someone from the government's watching right now, would you urge them to change the legal drinking age in the province?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I get the whole health piece behind it. But when I was 18, I was skedaddling off to Montreal to have a beer or two. So I think if you change that age, you're going to have riskier behaviors because you're going to have these kids saying, well, you know, hey, if I give you $20, can you go buy me a case of beer or a Mickey or. And again, we're going back into that basement and suddenly no one sees them and God only knows what's going to happen. It's about educating. I don't think that saying to someone you're not old enough to do this, because the second you change that, they're going to run out and do it anyway.
Matt, your view on 19?
I agree with Ren. When I was in university, you're finding the guy that either is 19 or has a fake ID to go to the LCBO and buy you a Mickey of Jack Daniels, and then you're drinking that whole thing in a night because you don't know what normal consumption of that is, and then you're having issues. Whereas if you can go to a bar at 18, or you can go to a bar with your parents when you're at that age and enjoy responsible consumption, then you're just going to learn those habits.
I was just thinking, like, in a sense, it's a non-issue because this is not even what's being discussed. There's all kinds of other measures. What's more worrisome is increasing distribution to corner stores. So, you know, I don't want to spend time, if you will, on something that's not even something the government's considering.
Well, it's not under consideration today, but they have indicated they're prepared to, you know, take down some fairly sacred cows. So you never know.
She may be
You never
suggesting that we
know.
shouldn't give them any ideas.
Is that the idea?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Jordan St. John, you definitely win the contest for the most clever, funny lines on the program tonight.
Well, thank you.
Well done, well
Oh,
done.
I didn't?
No, he was a little cleverer, I have to say. Anyway, good of all of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.